Superman landed in Kansas and became a symbol of hope. Now take away Kansas, put that same baby on Viltrum instead. Weakness gets you killed there. Mercy got carved out of the culture centuries ago. What comes out the other side is one of the scariest things either universe has ever produced. Let's start with the biology because this is where people usually get it wrong. Superman's powers don't come from Krypton itself. Under Krypton's red sun, Kryptonians had no powers at all. Their cells are dense and biologically superior to human cells, but without the right kind of solar radiation hitting them, those cells just sit there doing nothing. Yellow sun radiation is what unlocks everything. The strength, the speed, the flight, the heat vision, all of it. Krypton was just where the right kind of cells came from.
Why am I so different from them?
Earth's sun is younger and brighter than Krypton's was. Your cells have drunk in its radiation, strengthening your muscles.
The power itself was never Kryptonian, it was solar. Here's the part that changes everything. Viltrum orbits a blue star. Blue stars burn hotter than yellow stars. They push out way more radiation. And for a Kryptonian body that's already built to absorb and store solar energy, a blue star environment pushes that capacity somewhere Kal-El never gets to on Earth. The comics have actually shown this. When Superman gets exposed to blue sun radiation directly, his output spikes hard enough that he can share power with people standing near him. So throw out the idea that Superman raised on Viltrum is some weaker knockoff, he's stronger. Before Viltrumite training even touches him, before he's thrown a single punch, he's already ahead of the Superman we know.
Why was the Purge a blessing? Think well before you answer. You've seen what failure brings.
Because the Purge made us stronger.
Think about what Earth Superman can already do. He's shifted a planet's orbit, tanked nuclear blasts up close, flown straight through stars, and all of that is running on yellow sun energy that traveled 93 million miles, got filtered through Earth's atmosphere, and landed on cells that weren't even built to take it head on. Now put those same cells under a blue sun, zero atmospheric filtering, full direct exposure for an entire lifetime. The direction of that gap isn't up for debate. Viltrum raised Kal-El beats Earth Superman, and that's before training adds a single thing. But here's where it gets worse, because it's not just the biology, it's what Viltrum does to a kid. The culture on Viltrum runs on one rule. Worth comes down entirely to strength and what you can produce for the Empire. Weakness doesn't get frowned upon, it gets you killed. The Great Purge is the clearest example. After Emperor Argal got assassinated, Viltrumites slaughtered half their own population just to guarantee only the strongest half made it through.
When it was over, our population was cut in half. But what emerged from the ashes was unstoppable.
That event didn't break their society, it built the society that came after. Every kid grows up knowing every interaction is basically a test. Are you strong enough to deserve to exist? Drop Kal-El into that world as a baby, and he wouldn't experience any of it as messed up. He'd have nothing else to compare it to. He'd grow up exactly the way every Viltrumite kid grows up, constantly tested, constantly measured, constantly pushed to prove he belongs. And here's where his biology throws a variable Viltrum has never dealt with. He'd win every single one of those tests. Not because Kryptonian genetics are just flatly better. Viltrumites are also genetically engineered, with thousands of years of selective breeding behind them. But a Kryptonian pulling in blue star radiation while developing under Viltrum's extreme gravity would produce a power level that makes even the strongest Viltrumites uncomfortable.
You've grown stronger here than I ever could have imagined. The only way to know how strong is to keep testing your limits.
We're talking heat vision that could threaten the toughest fighters in the Empire, flight that could circle most Viltrumites, durability that makes Viltrumite level toughness look almost fragile by comparison. Thrag would clock this kid early. The Empire has systems built specifically to identify exceptional young Viltrumites. Strength gets measured against other kids their age and against veterans. The best of the best get pulled into training that matches what they can handle. A Kryptonian infant on Viltrum would be breaking those systems before he's old enough to walk properly. Now this changes everything about how Thrag has to think. Thrag's reaction to power he can't fully account for isn't fear the way humans experience fear. It's calculation. He stayed on top this long by spotting threats before they become real problems, then controlling them or removing them entirely.
Quarantine the sick. Then blockade the planet and exterminate all non-Viltrumites with knowledge of the virus.
A kid already outperforming Viltrumites twice his age triggers both instincts in him at once. He'd want to control the situation, and he'd spend every waking moment thinking through what happens if that control slips. Here's the actual danger Thrag would be staring down. Every Viltrumite has biological loyalty to their own species built into them through thousands of years of culture and breeding. They were made by the Empire. The Empire is the framework their whole identity grew up inside. Even the ones who eventually break away, guys like Nolan and Thetis, break as an act of will, fighting against extremely deep conditioning. This Kryptonian doesn't have that conditioning to fight against in the first place. He'd carry Viltrumite values because that's what his environment taught him, but he wouldn't have any Viltrumite biological belonging underneath it. His loyalty would be to the idea of the Empire, not to the Empire's blood. That's a completely different kind of loyalty, and different kinds of loyalty break in completely different ways Thrag has never had to plan for. So what would the training actually look like? The most brutal in Viltrumite history, full stop. Viltrumites train their young through direct combat against increasingly dangerous opponents.
You forgot, didn't you?
It is your day of adulthood.
If you survive.
I didn't forget, Mother.
Real fights, real stakes, veteran mentorship focused on how you apply force, not just raw output. Hand-to-hand is basically everything to them, using an opponent's own body weight against them, going for disabling strikes instead of total destruction whenever efficiency actually matters. Kal-El, raised inside that system, becomes the most technically refined fighter either universe has ever seen. And he'd be starting from a physical baseline the system was never designed to produce in the first place. He'd blow through the Viltrumite curriculum the same way Mark blew through high school math ahead of every benchmark, bored by tests supposed to actually challenge him, pushing his mentors right to the edge of what they could safely demonstrate without getting hurt themselves. Picture the early sessions. The first opponents assigned to test a young Viltrumite are usually veterans working well below their real capacity, calibrated to push the kid without real danger. For most kids, those sessions are seriously tough. Like for this kid, they'd be over before the veteran running the exercise even finished explaining what was supposed to happen. That kind of resource burn gets noticed. A kid who requires the Empire's strongest veterans just to provide a real test while he's still physically a juvenile becomes a known name at the highest levels of the Empire almost immediately. But that's not the scary part, yes, because training only teaches you how to fight. It also teaches you why you're fighting in the first place, and that's genuinely where this story turns dark. Viltrumite philosophy tells you strength exists to serve the Empire, full stop. That the entire point of being powerful is conquest. That other civilizations are worth exactly what they can contribute and nothing beyond that.
Viltrum was already the greatest empire in our galaxy. We decided to make it the only empire in our galaxy. Some species resisted, of course, but no one could withstand us for long.
None of this gets presented as ideology. It gets presented as plain fact. Nobody argues about whether planets deserve to be conquered. You accept it the same way you accept gravity. The way this gets installed in a kid isn't crude propaganda. The culture doesn't need fear campaigns because the worldview gets reinforced constantly through direct, observable consequence. Weak Viltrumites lose fights. Losing gets you killed or pushed out of anything that matters. Strong Viltrumites win, and winning gets you status, resources, survival, everything. A Kryptonian growing up watching that exact pattern play out daily with no Jonathan Kent standing there to push back on it absorbs the lesson exactly the same way, because it looks just as observably true to him as it does to every Viltrumite kid standing next to him. Nobody would need to convince him of anything. He'd just need to grow up paying attention.
Did it hurt you?
Yeah, they can't.
It's not what I meant. I meant, are you all right?
I wanted to hit that kid. I wanted to hit him so bad.
This is the part that takes the most imagination, because we're so used to Superman just being Superman. Superman's entire code of ethics isn't biological, it's cultural, built from the ground up. He doesn't protect human life because Kryptonian DNA has compassion baked into it somewhere. He protects it because Martha Kent cried watching the news one night, because Jonathan Kent told him power without purpose is empty. None of that happens on Viltrum. None of it. What happens instead is a kid learning that compassion toward the weak just produces more weakness. Like that mercy is a form of corruption. That the most powerful person in any room should be the the one whose judgment rules, because strength is the only legitimate basis for authority that exists. Kal-El, raised on those principles, wouldn't become Superman. He'd become the Empire's answer for everything it's been missing this whole time. He'd become the version of Thrag that even Thrag himself could never actually be physically superior. Trained to a level nobody's ever reached. Fully bought into everything the Empire represents, without any of the psychological cracks that eventually get to guys like Nolan. Nolan spent 20 years on Earth and humanity still got in through the cracks anyway. Conquest spent 5,000 years fighting and the loneliness still crept through eventually.
I am so lonely. All the other Viltrumites are scared of me. No one talks to me. No one wants to be my friend. They think I am unstable.
The Viltrumite system produces people who suppress their emotions because their culture tells them to, not because the emotions were never there in the first place. Kal-El raised on Viltrum would be different in exactly this one way. There'd be nothing to suppress, because the connection to other people that makes Earth Superman who he is would never have formed in him to begin with. And here's where this changes everything about how wars even work. Mark doesn't have He Vision, none of the Viltrumites do. Their whole power set runs on physical force, flight, and durability. That's basically it. Kal-El's heat vision at full blue star capacity is a category of ability the Empire has simply never had access to before. The Viltrumite method. Right now, the one that came out of the Scourge virus, wiping their numbers down to under 50, depends on a single soldier infiltrating a planet over years, building trust slowly, dismantling defenses from the inside before the Empire actually moves in.
I was the first to turn my back on our people's cruelty. The first to reject Argal and his rule of strength.
That whole method exists because the Empire doesn't have the numbers anymore for direct invasion. Kal-El breaks that math completely. You don't need years of careful infiltration when you can reduce a planet's entire communication network, its orbital defenses, its ability to even coordinate a response, to ash from orbit before anyone on the ground has any idea what's happening. That's the part that would actually worry Thrag the most, more than the raw power level itself. The Empire gains a soldier, sure, but way more than that. It gains a tool that makes its careful, patient, resource-conscious strategy completely unnecessary. And institutions built around scarcity don't always know what to do once they're suddenly handed abundance instead. Thrag would absolutely use him for exactly that.
You have work to do yet.
And Thrag would spend every waking moment wondering when the asset realizes he doesn't actually need the Empire anymore. Because here's the thing, every prior citizen of the Empire, no matter how strong, was biologically and socially Viltrumite. This being has none of that structural loyalty underneath him. He'd follow the Empire because it was his entire world, the only one he'd ever known. But he'd also be capable at some point of recognizing that his relationship to the Empire looks a lot more like an owner's relationship to a tool than a citizen's relationship to a home. Thrag would understand this risk better than literally anyone else because Thrag himself occupies a weird position in Viltrumite society. He wasn't born into power the way Argal's bloodline was. He got bred and built for one specific purpose.
However strong you think you are, Thrag is stronger.
There's a version of Thrag's own story that runs uncomfortably close to what this Kryptonian would go through. Thrag might spot the danger precisely because some part of him recognizes the shape of his own beginning sitting right there in front of him. So let's actually settle the fights people are going to ask about. Mark Grayson's own story is honestly the clearest proof for this entire theory, because Mark is the show's existing evidence for what environment does to raw power. Mark was born with Viltrumite genetics and grew up on Earth raised by Debbie Grayson. His values came directly from that upbringing. His instinct to protect random bystanders, his refusal to treat people as acceptable losses, all of it traces straight back to growing up human. Mark, even at his absolute strongest, isn't beating a blue sun-powered Kryptonian in a straight fight. The honest answer is that Viltrum-raised Kal-El surpasses whatever Mark becomes by the end of the comics. Mark's reactive Viltrumite biology is extraordinary, no argument there. He gets to the point where he can fight Thrag inside a dying star, but Kryptonian biology under blue star exposure doesn't just grow through combat like that. It absorbs and converts stellar energy at a rate that scales directly with whatever the source is putting out. Viltrum's blue star would have been charging this being every single moment. of his entire existence. Thrag is the harder comparison. Thrag was bred from birth to be the strongest Viltrumite ever produced. That breeding killed Mark's own father in direct combat. Thrag, at his absolute peak against Kal-El, at his absolute peak under Blue Sun conditions, is a fight where the evidence leans toward Kal-El, but narrowly. Not for sure. The heat vision and the broader toolkit give Kal-El angles Thrag's combat experience never prepared him for. Thrag has never fought a Kryptonian in his life. Every fighting style he knows was built for opponents whose abilities fall inside the normal Viltrumite range, but Thrag's got 5,000 years of combat intelligence behind him. He'd spot the problem faster than anyone else in the entire Empire, and his response would be to never let that fight turn into a straight exchange in the first place. What about Alan? His story gives us the cleanest test case for what a non-Viltrumite power ceiling actually looks like when pushed by near-death experience. Alan got bred specifically to fight Viltrumites.
The breeding camps were also a genetic enhancement program designed to breed a soldier that could defeat a Viltrumite in combat.
When 3 Viltrumites nearly killed him, Thetis used that as a forced trigger for reactive adaptation. It worked. Alan woke up stronger, eventually strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the strongest Viltrumites in the Empire. But that progression is bounded by whatever his Unopan biology can actually absorb. There's a built-in design intention behind the upper limit of what near-death pressure can pull out of him. Kryptonian biology under Blue Sun conditions doesn't come with that same bounded design. It wasn't engineered for a fight against Viltrumites specifically. It evolved on Krypton, then found an external power source in stellar radiation that scales with whatever star happens to be feeding it. There's no obvious ceiling the way there is with Alan. Against Viltrum-raised Superman, Alan's upgrades might not arrive fast enough. Now here's a complication almost nobody's thinking about. Anissa, she eventually settles down on Earth and falls for a human named Scott Murphy. That relationship reshapes what she values enough that she ends up defending Earth against Thrag's own faction. She's proof that Viltrumites, despite a culture built to suppress this exact kind of attachment, are still capable of forming it.
Humans were dying, so I took action, much like our Empire will do when it controls Earth.
If Anissa ever crossed paths with a Kryptonian raised inside Viltrumite culture, visibly cracking under the same suppression she eventually broke through herself, she might be the one Viltrumite in the whole Empire equipped to spot what's happening to him before he even recognizes it in himself. That's a real complication for Thrag's management plan. He's trying to keep a weapon stable and loyal. He's not accounting for another Viltrumite choosing to protect the cracks instead of reporting them. And here's where the Coalition's whole strategy falls apart. The Scourge virus targets Viltrumite DNA specifically. Kal-El's DNA is Kryptonian. The virus wouldn't touch him at all. The inner ear frequency weapon that destabilizes Viltrumite flight relies on messing with a specifically Viltrumite balancing organ.
Remember that giant lobster you tangled with in Atlantis? I had the lab boys recreate the sound it made. Turns out we can transmit it to your earpiece.
His flight doesn't work that way. His whole propulsion system is different at the biological level. The Coalition's 2 most effective weapons against Viltrumites would both be completely useless against their single, most powerful member. So, what actually stops this version of Superman? Honestly, nothing in the Invincible universe stops him cleanly. Not in a straight fight. The only real question is whether he ever stops himself, because this is not the scary part yet either. Kryptonians are extremely sensitive to red sun radiation in a very specific way. Under a red sun, their powers don't just fade, they disappear completely, dropping him back down to the biological baseline of a regular Kryptonian with 0 solar enhancement. Viltrum itself orbits a blue star, but the wider galaxy has plenty of red stars scattered through it. Any planet in the Empire's reach that happens to orbit a red sun becomes a location where this being's power just shuts off entirely. He'd also be vulnerable to kryptonite. That radioactive mineral from the remnants of Krypton's destruction causes real pain and power loss at even the smallest trace exposure. Krypton got destroyed before this version of Kal-El's story even begins, so kryptonite exists out there somewhere even if Viltrum never ran into any of it. Viltrum-raised Kal-El would have absolutely no knowledge of either weakness existing. He'd never have run into them. He'd never have had any reason to even think about them, but they'd still be sitting there, built straight into his biology, just waiting. Whether Thetis and the Coalition ever land on that conclusion depends entirely on how much time they had. And whether they ever got their hands on any surviving information about Krypton in the first place. But in a story where the Coalition proved resourceful enough to develop the Scourge virus, a targeted pathogen engineered against one specific alien genetic profile,
The Scourge virus. If released, not a single Viltrumite will survive its wrath this time.
the idea that they couldn't eventually crack this too doesn't really hold up. The real question underneath all of this is whether Viltrum raised Superman would ever turn on the Empire himself, and this is honestly where the most interesting version of this whole story actually lives. The culture teaches its people that emotion equals weakness, full stop. Conquest told Mark during their fight that he was lonely, and he said it without a shred of self-pity, just stating it like a fact he'd accepted a long time ago. That works fine for beings who actually have Viltrumite emotional architecture underneath them. Kal-El's emotional architecture is Kryptonian, not Viltrumite. Superman on Earth connects to humans so deeply he sometimes seems to feel their pain right alongside them. That's not some cultural training effect Kansas gave him, it runs way deeper. It's just part of what Kryptonians actually are, baked in at the cellular level. Superman in the comics has been left completely vulnerable by grief in ways his physical invulnerability does absolutely nothing to prevent. He's felt the death of people he cared about as an actual physical weight pressing down on him. That's a biology that stores emotional experience right alongside solar energy. On Viltrum, all of that would get trained against constantly every single day. He'd get taught that what he felt toward weaker beings was just a failure of perspective, and he'd genuinely be capable of following that instruction better than almost anyone because his willpower is extraordinary even by Kryptonian standards. He'd suppress it, he'd turn connection into tactical loyalty and feeling into raw performance metrics, but he'd still feel it underneath all of that, and the suppression wouldn't be absolute. At some point, in some specific moment, the exact thing Viltrum spent his whole life telling him was weakness would end up being the only thing left standing in the room with him.
And what were they doing with those fragile little lives anyway?
Maybe it's a planet whose population fought back with more desperation than expected. Maybe it's a kid who looks at him with some expression he can't fully explain to himself. Whatever that moment ends up being, Viltrum raised Kal-El would eventually run straight into what Nolan ran into in Chicago. What Conquest ran into for 5,000 straight years and just became numb to instead. The question of whether the thing he got made into is actually who he is deep down. For Nolan, that answer took 20 years and a whole child to finally arrive. For Conquest, it never fully arrived at all. What he actually does with that moment is the whole story right there. If he breaks from the Empire the same way Nolan broke, the Invincible Universe gets the single most powerful ally the Coalition could ever hope for. Someone immune to their usual counters, someone who knows the Empire completely from the inside, someone whose physical capacity could genuinely match or exceed Thrag in direct conflict, but that defection wouldn't look anything like Nolan's. Nolan's break happened privately inside a single devastating fight.
What will you have after 500 years?
You, Dad. I still have you.
A Kryptonian capable of disabling an entire planet's infrastructure from orbit defecting from the Empire is a galaxy-altering event the second it happens. If the recognition arrives and he chooses neither the Empire nor its enemies, the Invincible Universe has a problem it genuinely has zero precedent for handling. He might withdraw completely. He might set his own terms for getting involved at all. And if that moment just never comes, if Viltrum's training genuinely holds all the way through to the end, the Invincible Universe loses something it never even got the chance to have. Not just a battle, not just a war, the whole possibility of the specific kind of hope Kal-El represents in every other version of his story, snuffed out before it ever got the conditions it needed to grow into anything.
The symbol of the House of El means hope. Embodied within that hope is the fundamental belief in the potential of every person to be a force for good.
The Coalition loses, the Viltrumite war ends before it even really begins. Earth falls. The version that lands in Kansas becomes Superman. The version that lands on Viltrum becomes something the universe just isn't ready for. The cells are identical. What changes is absolutely everything around them. The Kents taught a kid that strength exists to protect the people who can't protect themselves. Viltrum would have taught that same exact kid that strength exists to determine who even gets to survive in the first place. Same raw material completely, totally different output. Robert Kirkman built the Viltrumites as a dark mirror of Kryptonians from the very beginning. The shared ancestry between Viltrumites and humans, confirmed straight in the official handbook, the near-identical power sets, none of that is a coincidence. Invincible has always been in direct conversation with Superman's mythology, constantly asking what happens if the alien with godlike power got raised by a culture that weaponized him instead of loving him. Mark Grayson is the answer from the Viltrumite side, a Viltrumite-raised human. Viltrum-raised Superman is the answer from the completely opposite direction. A Kryptonian-raised Viltrumite, put both of them in the exact same universe and you get the cleanest possible demonstration of the show's entire thesis. Power never determines who you become. The people who actually raise you do that. Kansas gave him a reason to catch people instead of conquering them. Season 5 of Invincible drops in early 2027. Subscribe and be here the second it does.